moment on the Middle East. And Prime Minister, you were in Rafah a few months ago. You called for respect for the ICJ judgment. You know, we are at a time when nearly 30,000 lives have been lost in Gaza, even though it follows on the heels of an absolutely appalling and grim Hamas attack on Israel on October the 7th. When is enough enough, and how do we stop this sort of apparently indiscriminate killing of civilians? And I think it is worth saying, just to build on Udo's point, you know, the last 2 years have been the most violent in terms of civilian deaths since the Rwanda genocide. I mean, we're living at a moment when the sort of rules of law as regards civilians seem to be breaking down everywhere, not just the Middle East, but much more widely. Prime Minister.
Indeed, as you say, not just in the Middle East. I think what differentiates us.
Component of corruption. What are the challenges you're looking at?
Okay, you're absolutely right that when we started this fight against corruption, it looked like a united us was that all of us were professionals, some working in business, other people working in education, science, and we were gathered together because we wanted to have a better quality of life, and the quality of life is deteriorating in all the aspects when you have these problems. But there is a big but here, and it is that Bulgaria is located in the eastern part of Europe, and we have a lot of historical, cultural connections with Russia. And then all of a sudden it turned out that when you look back and you connect the dots, you see that along with the classical corruption schemes that you have another type of corruption at a huge scales that affects all aspects of our life. And I'll give two examples just to show what is the pattern. So one example is about the nuclear power station that was not realized, but it took more than €1 billion that were spent without having nothing at the end. And the other one is about the so-called South Stream pipeline for gas that was meant to connect Russia via Bulgaria to Central and Eastern Europe as a pipeline that again was not realized, but we spent hundreds of millions of euros for this. And in both cases, and there are also other cases like that, you see that always it was presented as a great project with a lot of political influence that was involved, with a lot of prospects how good this will be for the people of Bulgaria. And at the end of the day, you see that it was done against the regulations, national or European. The money was spent, not transparently, and there is nothing at the end as a final product. So this type of corruption has different additional aspects that creates problems, like the political influence. Part of them turned out to be the preparation related to the preparation of Russia for the war in Ukraine. So you see that there are other aspects that we can keep in mind when we discuss corruption here.
There's something called the Kremlin playbook, and I recall, and I'll come to you, Senator Whitehouse, in a moment, because I recall distinctly a picture of you, I think, speaking in the Senate with that book in the House. But I think we are talking here about exactly the kind of strategic corruption where you use corrupt deals through the energy sector, et cetera, to gain power over entire countries. And when it becomes particularly concerning, I think, when we talk about securities, when we're talking about nuclear reactors, I mean, quite apart from, of course, gaining control over energy, when you then have these highly sensitive energy installations, it's even more concerning. So, Prime Minister, how do we, I mean, probably in the first 10 minutes, we've already completely convinced this room that corruption should be at the heart of corruption, of security and defense considerations. But just if you had to add a few more elements, how would you really, how would you try to convince the international community here in Munich that this is central?
Okay, I started with a negative example. So how we failed in some of our attempts to fight this corruption. But actually, we have quite a positive examples as well. Just in the last 2 years after the war started, so the war was really ringing the bell that we have to get out of this trap that we were in these energy relations with Russia. We were 100% dependent on the gas, on oil, on nuclear fuel. In the energy sector, it was 100% dependence. And in these 2 years, we succeeded to cut completely the gas dependence. This month, we completely removed the oil dependence. We have now deals with France and with US for the nuclear fuel. We have an agreement with Westinghouse to have 2 new nuclear reactors. All of this is done transparently through the parliament, through the discussions with the public. And this shows that this dependence can be removed very rapidly if you have the political will and if you have the partners to do this. So I'm really thankful to the European Commission, to the Basel Institute, to other international institutions that helped us with the expertise, but also with the support that we can implement these political ideas into the real life. So Bulgaria today looks quite different as compared to what it was just 2 years ago. So good luck if you have.
I'll ask you for advice.
I think we should, it's been a dream of mine anyway, to create a cohort of anti-corruption crusader heads of states and prime ministers. I think that will be a really interesting gathering, and I'm hoping we would find more than 2 handfuls, to be honest. It's interesting when we listen to the experience from Guatemala and Bulgaria, because there are quite a lot of a lot of similarities, yet sometimes the background's a bit different. Here we speak more about geopolitical influence from a really sort of power dynamic in the region. In your case, it's got to do a lot with illegal trafficking, although we know that in Eastern Europe that's a part of the issue as well. Kay, as the vice chair of the global anti-corruption watchdog organization Transparency International, we'd like to benefit from your completely global overview of everything. Of course, that's got to do with corruption. Can you give us maybe, if you could give us an example or 2, perhaps from a different region that we haven't touched upon, and you're yourself from Madagascar, of course, where you feel the effect of corruption on security, stability is the most nefarious?
Yes, so first of all, we have to recognize that corruption has become a global threat in the last decade or so. It has always been existed, of course, but it has been hidden behind the radar maybe or underestimated. But now we are seeing the escalation of violence and conflicts around the world, and most of them are fueled by corruption. So speaking of examples that we have in hand, one of the most pervasive effects of strategic corruption around the world and that we are seeing is the decay of democracy. The backsliding of democracy is one of the results of corruption being treated with impunity and being not treated as a priority by most of governments. I'm sorry to say that, but it has been always considered as a soft governance issue, which is not a priority. We can deal with that when we have time to lose. So we see those effects when foreign governments bribe or pay their enablers to also steal and capture power in other countries in order to preserve their private interests. We have seen lots of these across Africa. I will give you the example of my own country in Madagascar. For instance, in 2018, just before the elections, there was a Russian company who appeared to be allied with Wagner afterwards, which concluded a deal with the Malagasy government. They bought some stakes in a ferrum mining company. And afterwards, then it appeared that the then candidate to presidency had secret meetings with Putin and Prigozhin. And afterwards, some Russian people, a bunch of them from the defense and security sector, came to Madagascar with a bunch of cash and started an operation of disinformation, getting to the election of this president, who just made himself re-elected last November during elections fooled once again by corruption. So we're stuck there for 5 years. Another thing is that you should read, I will encourage you to read one of our latest reports called Loophole Masters, and how enablers, drive illicit financial flows across Africa, causing devastating effects. So we have surveyed 78 cases of corruption in 33 African countries, and they involved 87 enablers. What we call enablers of corruption are those lawyers, service providers, and private security societies at some point who help, sustain this transnational corruption. And they remain in total impunity most of the time. And we discovered that 52 of those 87 enablers are based here in Europe or in the United States. And in those countries, they can operate very freely. But those who pay the consequences of this transnational corruption are those ones staying in our countries, because corruption kills. It's not a joke. It really kills. We have seen and demonstrated that corruption makes conflicts more difficult to tackle. When you have corrupt armed forces in a country, they are not efficient. We have seen the example of Afghanistan, for instance. Despite 20 years of funding to the army, they were corrupt and they were not efficient, and the strategy collapsed at some point. In Africa, we have a population which is angry because of the armed force, the bribed armed force. We have lots of this in West and Eastern Africa. The trust is broken between the populations and the armed force, and this creates another cycle of violence. And then comes a militia who is saying, we are the ones who can solve the problems. They will buy arms once again from those countries who are also fueling this business. So it's everywhere. By the end of the day, we seem to lose hope, but nonetheless, we don't have to lose hope because there are solutions.
Is a closer cooperation, engagement in some form or other between our anti-corruption bubble and the defense and security bubble one of the solutions? And if so, how could we action on this?
Yeah, so the first thing is, once again, recognizing that this is a real issue, corruption. And it's lovely for you to have invited me here representing Transparency International. We're very happy with that. But next time it will be better, and this is an ask towards the organizers, that we have more than 45 minutes in the 4 days of the conference to speak about corruption, because corruption has many, many aspects, and the linkages between the defense and security sector and corruption has been long time undermined. This has to change. Collaboration is key, and one of the assets that we have as a global movement of practitioners or of anti-corruption fighters is that we are fighting on the ground in 110 countries. We know the reality. And we are doing a lot of research and investigation. We are producing a lot of tremendous reports. They are amazing. Just go to our website. Please pick the ones you want. We have a brand new defense and security strategy right now, so this can be useful to the network of this conference and all of those who are involved in the defense and security sectors. We really need to start collaborating now. We have the data, we have the facts, we have all of this. So please take this and make meaningful decisions. Those of you who are located on those countries who fueled sometimes all of these conflicts, please stop taking impunity around enablers. Those who are convicted of corruption should be punished, because there is also this question of integrity and exemplarity that we need to prove and to maintain across the world, because otherwise people will keep thinking that this is a lost cause. Well, it's not. Anti-corruption has to be set as a priority, just like any other issues. And it has to be involved in peace building, planning around public procurement in defense and security. In everything strategic, you have to have anti-corruption. We have the expertise once again, and our doors are open to any kind of collaboration. Yeah.
I think you're hitting so many points that are critical, and 45 minutes indeed are a good starting point, not quite enough. 60 would have been better. But some of these points, I think, it's quite interesting actually when you speak to the peace. I just had a similar event, slightly less high-powered, I have to say, with the peace community, and it was, we had such a good mutual understanding, yet it was clear that it was like listening to each other, and yes, I totally see what you mean, but in fact, we don't do much with it. The United States, in 2021, Senator White House decided to kind of designate corruption pretty officially as a national security risk.
Sean ustedes bienvenidos a una transmisión más acá en Guatemala TV, donde el presidente Bernardo Arévalo ha iniciado su gira allá por Europa con su delegación oficial que está encabezada por el señor presidente Bernardo Arévalo y también pues está integrada por ministros de Relaciones Exteriores Carlos Ramiro Martínez, la ministra de Economía Gabriela García, la secretaria privada de la presidencia la señora Ana Glenda Tajer y la embajadora Mónica Bolaños Pérez. Asimismo también se acompaña de la primera dama, la señora Lucrecia Peinado. En este momento se le está realizando una entrevista allá en Alemania al presidente Bernardo Arévalo para ver todo el contexto de lo que ha acontecido en nuestro país en el ámbito de la República. Así que él se acompaña del primer ministro de la República de Bulgaria, Nikolai Denkov, del señor Sheldon Whitehouse, es senador de Charmaine, del Senado del Comité de Estados Unidos, y también de Ketankandriana Rafit Sonson, que es de la Transparencia Internacional. En este momento se están abordando varios temas de la coyuntura de Guatemala, asimismo también a nivel de corrupción de geopolítica. Los dejamos entonces con esta transmisión desde Europa, con esta entrevista al señor presidente Bernardo Arévalo, allá en Alemania.
Really, pretty much every one of them has emerged out of an environment in which corruption was the basic sort of operating premise of governance. So I think all of that came together, and we began to realize in very important ways that the United States has to put global corruption higher up our agenda in order to head off many other problems that we would have to address later on in less pleasant ways.
Does it translate into more resources for anti-corruption in the US or abroad, or does it translate into different people having a say in your National Security Council? How do you kind of operationalize that recognition?
You got to do it pretty broadly because we really weren't there before. So, go for it is my simple motto. I think it's important to show international leadership. Very often when competing economies are trying to improve their anti-corruption methods, implicated industries come in and say, well, that's not fair, and I'll go to this other country. And you get into reverse competition over these things. So the first thing I think we need to do is to articulate a global goal about corruption that is a little bit like the global goal we've articulated about child labor. We simply will not tolerate child labor, and we have a whole variety of consequences when we see it, and we should do the same, particularly for the countries that harbor kleptocratic money and are engaged in that dark money. As we started looking at this in the United States, one of the things we were forced to recognize is that we were the problem. That the greatest location for hiding corruptly gained assets was, in fact, the United States of America. And that was not a brand we wanted to own. So we began to take that apart. We took it apart with the Corporate Transparency Act, so no more shell corporations. We've encouraged protecting our industries overseas with the Foreign Extortion Protection Act, so you can go after the bribe seekers. We've set up a whole new enterprise in the Department of Justice to go after and seize kleptocrat assets. And in the last few months, the Treasury Department has spun off new proposed regulations to deal with some of the major enablers, specifically in the real estate industry and in the investment advisory industry. They're not directly involved in corruption, but when they're managing the money of corrupt officials elsewhere, you got to put a stop to that. And we cannot. There's a fundamental conflict on the world, on the earth right now, I think, between kleptocracy and autocracy on the one hand and rule of law on the other. And if you're a kleptocrat or an autocrat and you've stolen a lot of money, you want to move that money over into rule of law, because otherwise the next biggest crook just takes it away from you. So rule of law, that part of the world, has been aiding and abetting, giving aid and comfort to our biggest threat, which is the kleptocracy and autocracy side of the world. And that's what we've been trying to eliminate step by step in the United States. And since I'm sitting next to Kate from Transparency International, I got to say the U.S. Office of Transparency International has been very, very useful, strong, and helpful in all of those endeavors, legislative, regulatory, administrative. So,
I agree.
Bravo and thank you.
They do a good job. Shout out to Gary in case he's listening to us online.
Yes.
We're going to open up to the floor now, but we do have a first what's the word for that?
Intervention.
Intervention, thank you very much, by Hannah Hopke, who's an anti-corruption specialist and activist from Ukraine. Please, Hannah.
Yeah, thank you so much. Maybe I stay here. I'll just... thank you for this panel. And after the Dignity Revolution, Euromaidan, Ukraine achieved a lot in anti-corruption, judicial reform, decentralization. And this was one also of the reason why Putin, in his statement on February 23rd, of 2022, before the full-scale war, actually in his statement, he mentioned all the achievements, specifically saying that Ukrainians with the National Anti-Corruption Bureau, with the Agency of Prevention Corruption. So the successes of Ukraine in anti-corruption made very nervous Russian dictator, because the successful Ukraine is a nightmare for authoritarian regimes. So you could watch the speech and you will see the list of reform mentioned by the dictator. So this is really important. But today I would like to say important things, saying that Russian aggression against Ukraine has redefined the struggle against corruption. The stakes in the past were, first of all, good governance, transparency, building democratic institutions, eliminating kickbacks. So we all in the past consider fight against corruption as a fight against offshores in Panama, fight against vanity construction projects. So fight was also against the destruction of natural culture heritage. But this is really important, but Russian genocide against Ukraine changed everything. It's crystal clear that without strong institutions producing strong policies and implementation, anti-corruption means nothing. Because it's already 10 years of Russian ongoing aggression. If 10 years ago it was just Russia alone invading Ukraine with illegal annexation of Crimea, 2024 it's coalition of kleptocracies, a coalition of authoritarian regimes. It's Russia with munition from North Korea, it's Russia with kamikaze drones from Iran, it's Russia with the support from China, and desovereignization of Belarus already happened. So I think it's really important to understand that the world's greatest combination of threat, mafia-style politics, kleptocracy, no respect for human rights, and arsenal backed by nuclear threat is in the Russian Federation. So I think that the bright future promised by the international rules-based order is dying. It's dying on the front lines in Ukraine, in battlefields across Africa and the global south. Dying in polarized legislators and unmanageable debt to GDP ratios, dying in broken promises and fear of fighting terrorism and genocide with armies instead of blockades. I challenge you to recognize corruption beyond legal boundaries. I challenge you to recognize corruption as a failure of principles to and entire institutions and stand up and make morally correct choices. And I think it's really important to understand that I challenge also you to question how our elected officials got it so wrong on a terrorist state, exporting violence to the global south, running a land war in Europe, not since in 1945. And also, I'm very thankful to Senator Whitehouse for his proactive position on Repo Act and
Les
confiscation.
estamos llevando a ustedes este spotlight, este foco de atención en esta discusión que se está tratando allá en Alemania sobre temas de corrupción. Es un public square en el cual el presidente Bernardo Arévalo pues, está siendo abordado sobre temas de corrupción por medio de la moderadora Greta Fenner. Ella es directora del Instituto de Gobernanza de Basel. Y aparte de ello, también se están comentando que uno de los más grandes retos en esta época es brindar vivienda y salud a la población, el cómo luchar y abordar estos retos en un país como Guatemala. Estamos acá en Guatemala TV llevándoles a ustedes este foro allá en Alemania donde se encuentra de gira el presidente Bernardo Arévalo. Continuamos con la transmisión.
The corrupted governance of Russia, like totalitarian regime, is very vulnerable. And we need to see strong decisions, tough positions on recognizing Russia as a state sponsor of terrorism, confiscating assets and providing more weapons for Ukraine, because victory of Ukraine and defeat of Russian imperialism, this is something that other dictators will consider serious, and the strategic corruption which we've seen and which resulted in the genocide against Ukrainians, it's really important to tackle and to help us to win. So thank you.
Thank you for challenging us, Hannah. I do know that there are reactions in the panel already, but I have another request for the microphone just behind Hannah. Please, can someone bring her a microphone? Okay, perfect. Can you please identify yourself?
Yes, so my name is Obi Ezekwesili, and I am excited to see our dear friend Kate on that panel.
Me too.
Because 30 years ago, I was younger than this, and I was a co-founder of Transparency International, together with our dear friend Peter Eigen. And so hearing you say that our U.S. branch has been doing some spectacular work makes me very glad. Because 30 years ago, nobody dared to talk about corruption in the way that we've spoken about it here today. But it also then shows how much progress we made, and yet so much more that needs to be done. So my direct challenge is this. I think that too often we fail to realize that a number of problems have surfaced in our global relationships that institutions of multilateralism as conceived in post-World War II are insufficient to address. I think that this whole idea of assuming that we can tinker a little here and a little there with one additional rule and an additional, organization, and somehow these things will go away, that's a big lie. I want to say that the courage we need in our world today, especially when we gather in a place like this, is to call it for what it is. We lack political leaders around our world. We have too many political leaders that are about themselves now. Where are the leaders? Where really are the leaders of the world? The political incentives are going in the direction of people wanting to self-preserve. So I listened to the chairman of Budget Committee, Mr. Whitehouse, and I loved the litany of things that you've said that the United States is doing. I love that. But we're going to need more. Because the truth is, this asinine, great power competition that's making the world lose its universal values that should be the basis for us simply knowing that what's wrong is wrong. My continent is suffering the consequences of bad behavior of bigger economies. Every corrupt action that happens in a bigger economy has an unsalubrious impact on the poor in Africa. We need to think of it that way. So what's my solution? My solution is that it is time.
Can you keep it to 30 seconds? We're running out of time, and we have other people. Thank you. No, go.
I need us to build a new global system and to design a new multilateral set of orders and institutions that are inclusive. And that means that the young people and the women have to be at the center of saying that these are the new values that would harmonize the way we do things in our world. And I'd like to suggest that you start saying that to whoever wins the US elections.
Just checking if there are further short questions in the audience. Otherwise, I'll bring it back to the panel just to see how you want to react to these challenges here. Do you want to start, Senator
I
Whitehouse?
would make the very quick observation that for the corruption machine, maintaining corruption is life or death. You take away their corruption, there goes the money, there goes the power, there goes the limousines, there goes everything. So they fight to defend it with determination because for them, persisting in corruption is a life or death struggle. For us, we have all sorts of things to talk about. It's another issue. We got 45 minutes at the Munich Security Conference. On we go to something else. The energy and persistence and determination of the corrupt needs to be matched by similar energy, persistence, and determination by those trying to root out the corruption.
Yeah.
And I might add that those who are supposed to find the solutions are effectively those who maintain the system, right? So how do we break through that, Kay? And I think in Guatemala and Bulgaria we might have that.
What I wanted to emphasize is just you need to humanize defense and security as well when thinking of corruption, because one of the things that we at Transparency International are doing, and you know that, dear founder, is that we bring the voices of the victims of corruption and we value them, and this feed as well this need of global reforms that we push for. So humanizing this, but also at the same time we need to break the cycle of secrecy around illicit financial flows by having more registers of beneficial ownership. This has to become a norm, and this has to become mandatory everywhere, especially in countries with weak governance and weak legal frameworks. So you are putting a lot of money in anti-corruption defense now, promotion. Ask more from those weak governments before, giving them more money for having mock elections, please. So do better next time, please. Thank you.
Mr. President, please.
Yes, I would like to follow up something that I think it's underlines our interventions, but follows up explicitly to Kate's point. I think that the fact that we are giving very little attention to the issue of corruption in the context of a big conference on security is because we have not really recognized how much corruption has changed in the 21st century. I think that we were used to corruption being a problem of bad administration, nuisance, something that happened while people ruled. But actually we are facing now a situation in which we are seeing political criminal cliques organizing to actually take control of state institutions in order to actually really make them work for corruption, for crime. And this is a fundamental threat to the viability of democratic states. It's beyond a threat to the security establishment. I think that the case of Afghanistan shows it very clearly, that it caused the collapse of the state. And we are having in Latin America now cases in Ecuador, cases in Colombia, cases in Mexico, where we're witnessing the real threat that corruption is bringing to governance and viability of political institutions. It is no longer a nuisance. It is a direct political threat. Until we do not recognize that, we're not going to really be able to muster the energy, the imagination, and the commitment at the international level to fight it effectively.
Thank you, Mr. President. Prime Minister, final words.
I was thinking what else I can add, and I was looking again for some positive examples, because we have seen many.
En este momento que tendrían a Rafi Thompson, quien es vicepresidenta de Transparency International, la organización global que trabaja para promover la integridad y la rendición de cuentas en el sector público y privado, ha consultado al señor presidente Bernardo Arévalo sobre cuál es la potencia que ha llegado a tener la corrupción en un país como Guatemala y qué células son las que hay que trabajar y abordar para poder combatirla. El presidente ha mencionado que no se tiene un alcance claro, no se tiene una medición de hasta dónde ha llegado la corrupción en nuestro país, pero asimismo se va a trabajar para poder descubrir que hay muchos líderes que han tenido a su cargo pues sectores de poder para poder establecer la corrupción y que es ahí donde hay que combatirlo. También mencionaba sobre algunos puntos y otros países en Latinoamérica que están enfrentando temas de corrupción desde hace muchos años y que en cuanto a eso se debe tener mucha unidad. Continuamos entonces con la transmisión desde este Spotlight allá en Alemania, donde está siendo entrevistado el presidente Bernardo Arévalo junto a otras autoridades de gobierno a nivel mundial. Esto es en Alemania.
Engage in more dialogue and cooperation, because truly I believe, as a concluding, trying to conclude everything that was said, if we do not understand the critical role of corruption undermining everything to do with governance, global stability, international law, etc., we will have a lose-lose situation, and we cannot come out of Munich with a lose-lose situation. So that's our challenge. Thank you for your attention. Thank you so much to my wonderful panelists. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Les hemos llevado a ustedes el Spotlight on Corruption, que es una organización no gubernamental que se dedica a investigar y denunciar la corrupción en el Reino Unido y en el mundo. Y este Corruption Public Square es un evento organizado por Munich Security Conference, que se va a celebrar el 18 de febrero del 2024 allá en Alemania. Para ello, el presidente Bernardo Arévalo ha llegado por una gira en Europa para discutir pues muchos temas de relación bilateral. Así que les hemos llevado hasta ustedes este spotlight, este foco de atención que se ha dado por esta conferencia para llevarles a ustedes acá en Guatemala TV. Continuamos entonces con más de la programación de Guatemala TV y más adelante les estaremos brindando a ustedes más información y más transmisiones sobre la gira del presidente Bernardo Arévalo por Europa. Continuamos.